There are many great single-player games, but some games offer so much quality content to us players that it seems like a steal of a game, like hundreds of hours of gameplay, mini-games, and just a ton of stuff to do. While I know I sometimes just want a short linear game, it's not really a good thing when developers are competing over whose game is the longest. That's literally one of the worst things. So what I am trying to say is that the games I'm going to be talking about today are long and worth your full money, without the devs bullshittily padding the game, but rather delivering meaningful, long content. Now, this isn't just about the length of one single playthrough that I'm considering. While yeah, that's absolutely important, I am also going to talk about some games that have so many different choices and paths you can take that feel very fresh, that a 10-hour game becomes 50 or even 100. So yeah, let's get into it. Oh, Middle-earth: Shadow of War is one of those games where when people talk about getting their money's worth, this thing is like a prime example, because yeah, technically you can finish the main story in like 20-25 hours if you really focus on it, but that is absolutely not how this game is designed to be played. This game is basically built around systems that constantly generate new stuff for you to do, and once it clicks, you realize you could honestly sink like 100 hours into it without even noticing. The biggest reason for that, obviously, is the Nemesis system, and I know people bring that up all the time, but seriously, it is still one of the coolest mechanics any AAA game has ever made. Basically, every single orc captain in the world has their own personality, strengths, weaknesses, rivalries, and little quirks, and the game is constantly generating new ones. So you're not just clearing out camps or killing generic enemies, you're building these weird personal rivalries with these guys. Like, you'll kill some random captain early on, forget about him, and then 10 hours later he shows back up with scars on his face talking trash about how he survived you. That type of stuff happens constantly. And the crazy thing is that these moments feel completely unscripted, like the game is basically creating these little stories for you as you play. I had captains betray me mid-battle, I had bodyguards suddenly turn on their warlord because I secretly recruited them earlier. I had a guy come back from the dead like 3 times and become this personal nemesis that I just wanted gone forever. It's that kind of system where the more you play, the more ridiculous and personal the stories get. But then on top of that, the game also adds the fortress system, which honestly is where a massive chunk of the long-term gameplay comes from. Each region has a fortress that you basically have to infiltrate and conquer by building up your own army of orcs. And that means dominating captains, leveling them up, assigning bodyguards, setting up your own hierarchy. It almost becomes this weird strategy layer on top of the open-world action game. So you're not just running around fighting stuff, you're recruiting enemies, managing your army, setting up defenses, and then launching these huge fortress sieges where dozens of captains are fighting each other at the same time. It feels like this big Lord of the Rings war happening dynamically around you. And because every captain has traits and personalities, the outcomes are always different. And then the game just keeps stacking systems on top of that. There's legendary gear sets to chase, skill upgrades, different regions with their own captains and power struggles, and all these little side missions that expand the world a bit. And I will say, the combat itself is just really satisfying for long play sessions. It's that Arkham-style rhythm combat, but once you unlock a lot of the abilities, you start feeling ridiculously powerful. You're teleporting around the battlefield, dominating enemies mid-fight, summoning your own followers, executing captains in brutal ways. It gets to the point where big battles feel like controlled chaos. Now, the game definitely had some controversy when it launched because of the microtransactions and the endgame grind stuff, but after they patched a lot of that out, what's left is honestly just a massive system-driven sandbox. And if you're the type of player who enjoys messing around with mechanics and creating your own little stories, this game will just keep giving you things to do. Like, I went into it expecting a cool, story-driven brawler set in Japan, and what I got instead was this massive, weird, hilarious, emotional package of a game that just keeps giving you things to do for like dozens and dozens of hours. Because yeah, the main story alone is already fantastic. It's this really intense crime drama set in 1980s Japan where you play as Kiryu and Majima, and the whole plot revolves around this tiny piece of land called the Empty Lot that basically every criminal organization wants control of. And the writing here is actually way better than people expect. It starts kind of slow and grounded, but once the story starts ramping up with betrayals and power struggles and all that stuff, it just hooks you. But what really makes Yakuza 0 feel like a full meal of a game is everything outside of the main story. Because the moment you step out into the city, the game basically opens up this playground of side content that is honestly kind of insane. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that you could probably spend 50 hours in this game without even touching the main plot if you really wanted to. First off, the side stories, the sub-stories, are some of the best side content in any game. Instead of being generic fetch quests, they're these weird little mini-stories where you're helping random people around the city. One minute, you're helping a guy who's being scammed by a cult. The next minute, you're teaching a shy dominatrix how to insult her clients better, and then suddenly you're helping a kid buy a video game. They're hilarious, sometimes surprisingly emotional, and they make the city feel really alive. And then on top of that, you have the major side activities, which honestly could have been entire game modes by themselves. Kiryu has the real estate business where you're basically taking over different districts of the city and managing properties, fighting rival billionaires, upgrading buildings, and slowly becoming this real estate kingpin. And Majima has the cabaret club management, which is this surprisingly deep minigame where you recruit hostesses, train them, customize them, and run a nightclub while competing against rival clubs. And these systems are not just quick distractions either, they're full progression systems with storylines, bosses, upgrades, all that stuff. And then the cities themselves, Kamurocho and Sotenbori, are just packed with little activities. You can go to arcades and literally play old Sega games, go bowling, karaoke, batting cages, darts, disco dancing, pocket racing with toy cars, gambling, fishing, restaurants. The list just keeps going. And the funny thing is, most of these minigames are actually really well made. They're not just throwaway distractions. Some of them are weirdly addictive. The combat also helps a lot with the longevity, because each character has multiple fighting styles that feel really different. Kiryu has that classic balanced brawler style, but also the beast style where he's just smashing people with motorcycles and furniture. And Majima has the breaker style, which is basically breakdancing your way through enemies like a maniac. The more upgrades you unlock, the crazier the fights start to feel. And what I really like is that the world just encourages you to mess around. Like you'll walk down the street trying to go to a story mission, and suddenly you get dragged into a side story. Then you end up playing darts, then you decide to do some cabaret club management, and suddenly 2 hours passed and you didn't even touch the main quest. This is like the perfect example of what I was talking about in the intro, where a game might not be super long on one playthrough, but the sheer amount of branching paths and choices and different outcomes makes it absolutely worth your money. Like, I'm not gonna lie, when I finished my first playthrough, I thought I had a pretty good handle on the story. I was like, okay, cool, I made some choices, saw the ending, that was great. And then I looked at the flowchart, and I had seen maybe like 30% of what this game has to offer, maybe even less. And that's when it clicked for me that this game is wildly worth playing through multiple times because you will have completely different experiences. So this is a narrative-driven, choice-based, interactive drama game. You're not doing traditional combat or platforming or anything like that. You're making dialogue choices, doing quick-time events, exploring environments, and most importantly, making decisions that have massive consequences on the story. You play as 3 different androids in a future Detroit where androids are basically servants and workers for humans. And all 3 of these stories are happening simultaneously, and they intersect and diverge in really interesting ways based on your choices. And when I say choices, I mean like real, meaningful, holy crap, I can't believe that just happened kind of choices. Like, characters can die permanently. Not just side characters, but main playable characters can die based on your decisions or your performance in certain sequences. And when they die, the story keeps going without them. It doesn't give you a game over screen and make you reload. It just adapts. I had a moment in my first playthrough where I screwed up a QuickTime event during a chase sequence, and one of my favorite characters died. And I was just sitting there like, wait, what? That's it? They're just gone? And yeah, they were gone for the rest of that playthrough. The flowchart system is genius too. Like after every chapter, you can see this massive flowchart showing all the different branches and paths and choices you could have made, and you can see what percentage of players made the same choices as you. And when you see all these branches that you didn't even know existed, all these alternate scenes and outcomes, it makes you want to immediately go back and try different things. Like, wait, what happens if I don't shoot that person? What happens if I take the peaceful route instead of the violent one? What happens if I prioritize this character over that one? Also, graphically, man, this game, the motion capture and graphics are absolutely insane. Like the facial animations, the performances, it all looks incredible. That really helps sell the story and the characters. But here's where this game really earns its spot on this list: the replayability. My first playthrough took me about 10 or 11 hours, but I've played through this game like 4 or 5 times now, trying different paths, making different choices, seeing different outcomes, and every playthrough feels fresh because the story can go in such wildly different directions. Like there are entire chapters that can be skipped or unlocked based on your previous choices. There are character relationships that can develop in completely different ways. There are endings that range from hopeful to absolutely devastating. And the thing is, you kind of have to replay it to really appreciate what the game is doing. One playthrough is just scratching the surface. You need to see what happens when you make the opposite choices. Now, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is honestly one of those games where you start playing it thinking it's going to be a big RPG, and then a few hours later, you realize the game is absolutely massive. Like, this thing just keeps opening up the more you play it. The story alone is already pretty long, but what surprised me the most is just how much optional content Square packed into the world. So first off, the main story continues right after the events of Remake, and it follows Cloud and the group as they finally leave Midgar and start traveling across the world chasing Sephiroth. And one thing I really liked here is how the game actually slows down a bit compared to Remake and lets you spend more time with the characters. You're visiting new regions, meeting new people, and there are a lot more quiet moments between the big story beats. If you're someone who already loves these characters, this game gives them a lot of space to breathe. But where the game really explodes in terms of content is the world exploration. Instead of being mostly linear like Remake, Rebirth has these big open regions that you can travel across, and every one of them is packed with things to discover. You've got side quests, hidden areas, world intel activities, monsters to hunt, little environmental puzzles, and a bunch of different things tied to Chadley's research missions. And some of these regions are pretty big. You'll climb mountains, cross deserts, explore forests, find secret caves, and the game is constantly throwing new little objectives at you. It actually reminds me a bit of those RPGs where you start heading toward the next story objective, and then suddenly you get distracted by like 5 other things along the way. Then there are the side quests, which are way better than I expected. A lot of them actually focus on the party members and give them little character moments that flesh them out more. Sometimes you're helping people in towns, sometimes you're investigating weird monster problems. And then you have the mini-games, which honestly is where the game becomes kind of ridiculous in terms of how much stuff there is to do. Square went completely wild here. You've got card games like Queen's Blood, chocobo racing, piano rhythm games, shooting challenges, arena battles, and a bunch of weird little activities scattered across the map. Some of these are just quick distractions, but others have full progression systems tied to them. The combat system also gets way deeper the longer you play. It still has that mix of real-time action and tactical commands from Remake, but with more party members and more abilities to play around with. Each character feels really different in combat, so you're constantly switching between them mid-fight, building up ATB, using synergy abilities, managing spells, all that stuff. Once you really understand how the system works, battles become way more strategic than they look at first. And because there are so many optional bosses, combat challenges, and gear upgrades, you can easily spend a lot of extra time mastering the combat. The game gives you plenty of reasons to experiment with different materia setups and party combinations. So yeah, even though the main story itself is already pretty big, the real reason Rebirth feels worth the money is just how packed the entire experience is. You've got the narrative, the huge regions to explore, dozens of side quests, tons of mini-games, combat challenges, character upgrades, hidden secrets all over the place. If you're the type of player who just focuses on the main path, it's already a long RPG. But if you're someone who likes exploring every region and messing around with all the side activities, this thing can easily turn into a 70 to 100-hour experience. It really does feel like Square just threw an insane amount of content into this game. I knew going in that this was going to be a big game, but I was not prepared for just how much game is in this game. Like, I'm talking about a single playthrough being easily 100, 120, maybe even 150 hours if you're really exploring and doing everything. And that's just one playthrough. And then you realize that you can play as like 12 different classes, multiple races, make wildly different choices, and have a completely different experience. And suddenly, you're looking at a game that could consume 500 hours of your life if you let it. And the crazy thing? All of that content is good. Like really good, meaningful content. So let me break this down. Baldur's Gate 3 is a CRPG, a classic role-playing game, based on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rules. And if you're not familiar with D&D or you're not familiar with that system, don't worry, the game does a pretty good job of teaching you. But also, be prepared because this game has depth, like serious depth. Character creation alone can take you an hour if you really dig into it. You're picking your race, your class, your subclass, your background, your appearance, your stats, your spells, your proficiencies, and all of these choices matter throughout the entire game. It's not just cosmetic stuff. Like, if you're playing as a tiefling, NPCs will react to you differently than if you're playing as a human or an elf. If you're a warlock, you have a patron that's part of your story. If you're a cleric, your deity matters. It's all interconnected. And the story, man. Okay, so without spoiling anything, you and your companions get infected with these mind flayer tadpoles, and you're trying to find a way to remove them before you transform into a mind flayer yourself. And that's the main hook, but the story goes in so many different directions based on your choices and how you interact with your companions in the world. Like, there are entire quest lines that some players will never see because they made different choices or didn't explore certain areas or didn't talk to certain NPCs. The amount of branching content is insane. The combat is turn-based tactical combat, and it is so satisfying once you get the hang of it. Like, at first, if you're not used to this style of combat, it can feel overwhelming. There are so many abilities, so many spells, so many environmental factors to consider, but once you start understanding the systems, once you start experimenting with different strategies and combos, it becomes this really engaging tactical puzzle. Like, you can shove enemies off cliffs, you can use grease to make the ground slippery and then set it on fire, you can cast darkness and then use your dark vision to attack enemies who can't see you. You can polymorph enemies into sheep. You can use invisibility and stealth to position yourself before a fight even starts. The amount of creative freedom you have in combat is incredible. And the thing is, you can approach most situations in multiple ways. Like, if you want to go in guns blazing, swords swinging, spells flying, you can do that. But you can also try to talk your way through situations if your character has high charisma and the right skills. You can sneak around and avoid combat entirely. You can use deception, intimidation, persuasion. The game rewards creative problem solving, and that makes every encounter feel fresh and interesting. The world design is phenomenal too. Like, the areas you explore are these massive, densely packed maps with secrets everywhere. Hidden passages, locked doors, trapped chests, NPCs with their own little stories, environmental storytelling. You'll be walking through an area and just stumble upon some side quest or some environmental puzzle or some treasure that leads to a whole chain of events. And none of it feels like filler. Like, even the side quests are well written and engaging. Like, when we talk about devs not BSing you with padded content, CD Projekt Red kind of wrote the book on it here. You look at the map of Velen or Skellige and it's massive, but the crazy part is that it's actually filled with real stuff. You aren't doing simple stuff like mashing a button to collect 50 useless items. You wander into some tiny, muddy village, pick up a random piece of paper off a notice board, and suddenly you are completely sucked into this 3-hour-long tragic mystery with unbelievable writing. I like getting lost in games, and I spent a ridiculous amount of time just riding Roach through the swamps, listening to the wind howling. It's a game where you just constantly get sidetracked, but you don't even care because the side stuff is better than the main story in a lot of other games. Your brain starts to think like a monster hunter, assessing situations, brewing the right potions, and making some incredibly tough choices where there isn't really a good outcome. So while it's a pretty simple setup initially, you play as this guy named Geralt, who is like a career monster hunter. He's famous, he's, prestigious. He's also been around for a while, and it kind of seems like in this game he sets out to tackle the biggest mission of his life, finding his adopted daughter Ciri. He just goes out there to do the adventure for himself and the people he loves, not for the coin and glory that he had done for a lot of his career. And the game is straight up just like a massive fantasy simulating adventure. It took me easily over 100 hours to play through the base game alone, and there's a massive amount of story, but a lot of it really is the raw gameplay of physically over the course of the entire game exploring these enormous regions like Velen and Skellige. You can kind of take it slow and really, every conversation, every move is deliberate. You have to actually think like a Witcher. You choose your dialogue options very carefully because there are times where you gotta hurry up, you gotta think quick, and a poor choice means an entire village gets wiped out. There are a lot of factors here, and it can feel incredibly frustrating and sometimes tedious because there are points in this game where I've made a bad call and lost characters I really cared about. But it kind of comes with that whole living with the consequences thing. There is something about that continued, almost thick-headed, stupid perseverance and really getting there, the triumph of that final eventual victory when you finally hunt down a griffin or a leshen that's been terrorizing a town. I mean, this game, simulates a whole life. This isn't a spoiler or anything, but after you finish the game, you are able to jump into the expansions, Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine, and it's really cool to see that journey continue. When you step into the new map of Toussaint, you think, oh, okay, that's like a big DLC, but that's not a big deal. But when you are the person there doing every single individual quest, that's when you realize, wow, this game just does a really good job of simulating that feel of an entire second game packed into an expansion. On the surface, you jump into this and it's a really slick action game. You play as 2B, this android with a giant sword, and you're just out there fighting robots on a ruined Earth. The combat is done by Platinum Games, so it feels incredible. You're dodging, you're launching enemies, it's fast, and it looks really cool. The visual style, the ruined cityscapes, they aren't going for ultra photorealistic graphics all the time. They're definitely going for something a little artsy here, and I think it absolutely works. But then you beat the game. It takes maybe, 10 or 12 hours. You get the credits and you sit there and think, oh, okay, that was a cool action game, but that's not a big deal. But the game straight up tells you to keep playing, and this is where the devs totally respect your money. You load it back up, and now you are playing the exact same timeline from the perspective of her partner, 9S. And the gameplay completely shifts. Instead of just raw combat, you are playing these hacking minigames to do damage. You are seeing cutscenes from different angles, and you start learning the actual motivations of the bosses you just killed. You start to realize, wow, this game does a really good job of making you second guess everything you just did. And then you finish that playthrough and the game just takes the training wheels off. The third playthrough isn't a replay at all. It's a straight up continuation that picks up right after the first two endings, and everything just goes absolutely crazy. It's an incredibly frustrating and sometimes brutal narrative because it just rips your heart out. You spend so much time wandering these empty deserts and overgrown flooded cities. You read so many little video game notes and things left behind by dead androids or dead resistance fighters. But here, I actually found them effective, because they tie back directly into what you are doing and what your characters are going through. The story is kind of low-key at first, but then it asks all these heavy questions. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to the people you leave behind? There's a lot to that, and I thought that was really cool. Plus, the game has some really nice music. Actually, it has unbelievable music that hits perfectly at specific moments, giving you this profound sense of awe and wonder while you're exploring the ruins of humanity. It is definitely a little janky in some spots. Sometimes the map is kind of hard to read and you get lost in the city ruins trying to find a simple side quest. Sometimes the camera suddenly transitions from a 3D action game to a 2D side-scroller, or a top-down twin-stick shooter, which can feel kind of weird at first. But for the most part, all of that just really works for me. When you look back at your entire route through all the main endings, A, B, C, D, and E, it's really cool to see that journey. You get that absolute ridiculous perseverance, and the triumph of that final eventual victory in ending E is something I am probably going to think about for a really long time. Like, I'm not gonna lie, when I first jumped into this game, I was like, alright, here we go, medieval RPG, I know what I'm getting into. But then like 80 hours later, I'm still finding new quests, new systems to master, new ways to completely screw up a conversation with a noble because I didn't take a bath and I smell like absolute garbage. And that's the thing with this game, right? It is so dense, so packed with meaningful stuff to do that it almost feels overwhelming at first. So you're playing as Henry again, and without spoiling too much, the story picks up and it's this sprawling, historically grounded tale set in medieval Bohemia. And when I say historically grounded, I mean it. Like, this isn't some fantasy RPG where you're slaying dragons and casting fireballs. This is you, a regular-ass dude in the 1400s, trying to navigate politics, war, survival, and just like existing in this brutal, unforgiving world. And the developers, Warhorse Studios, they went absolutely nuts with the authenticity here. Like, every single system in this game is designed to make you feel like you are actually living in this time period. The combat alone, okay, so the combat is not for everybody. I will say that up front. It's not like a Witcher 3 or an Assassin's Creed where you're just mashing buttons and doing cool combos. This is like proper sword fighting simulation. You have to actually learn how to hold your weapon, where to strike, how to block, how to riposte, how to read your opponent. And at first, you're gonna get your ass handed to you. Like, I'm talking about getting destroyed by basic bandits because you don't know what you're doing. But over time, as you practice, as you train with the combat master, as you get into actual fights and start understanding the rhythm and the flow of it, you become this legitimately skilled swordsman. And that progression feels so earned, you know? Like, when you finally win a duel against a tough opponent, it's not because you leveled up some stat, it's because you, the player, got better at the game. You learned the systems, and that is incredibly satisfying. But combat is just one piece of this massive puzzle. Like, literally everything in this game has depth. The dialogue system, you can fail conversations. You can say the wrong thing to the wrong person and completely lock yourself out of quests or opportunities. And it's not always obvious what the right choice is, because, you know, you're dealing with real human politics and motivations. The reputation system is wild too. Like, if you go around stealing and being a jerk in one town, people will remember you. They'll treat you differently. Guards will be more suspicious. And if you show up to a fancy nobles party covered in mud and blood, they're gonna kick you out. You have to actually maintain your appearance, your hygiene, your reputation. It's like a full-on medieval life simulator. And the world itself, man, the map is huge, but it's not one of those bloated open worlds where it's just empty space with copy-pasted activities. Every town, every village, every little hamlet has its own identity, its own problems, its own stories. And the quests are so good. Like, you'll pick up what seems like a simple fetch quest, and it'll spiral into this multi-layered investigation where you're talking to witnesses, examining crime scenes, making deductions. The game trusts you to figure things out. It doesn't just put a big glowing marker on the map and say, go here, do this. You have to actually pay attention to what people are saying, read the quest log, use your brain. And I know that might sound tedious to some people, but for me, it made every quest feel meaningful and engaging. The amount of content here is insane. The main story alone is massive, probably like 40 to 50 hours if you're just mainlining it. But if you're like me and you want to explore, do side quests, master the various systems, engage with all the optional activities, you're looking at well over 100 hours easily. And none of it feels like padding, like the developers didn't just throw in a bunch of meaningless collectibles or repetitive tasks to inflate the playtime. Everything you do feels purposeful and rewarding. Let me talk about some of the side activities because they're actually really cool. You can become a master blacksmith and craft your own weapons and armor. You can learn alchemy and brew potions. You can gamble, play dice games, get into fistfights in taverns. You can go hunting and actually have to track animals. Use the right bow, aim carefully. There's a whole archery minigame that's super satisfying once you get the hang of it. And all of these systems tie back into the main game in meaningful ways. Like if you become a good blacksmith, you can maintain your own equipment and save money. If you're good at alchemy, you can brew potions that give you a real edge in combat. It's all interconnected. The pacing can also be slow, especially at the beginning. Like the game takes its time teaching you systems, introducing you to the world. Some people might find that boring, but for me, I was so immersed in the world, so interested in learning how everything worked that I didn't mind. It's like the game is saying, hey, you're gonna be here for a while, so let's make sure you understand how all this works. The graphics and presentation are incredible though. Like the world is absolutely gorgeous. The towns feel lived in and authentic. The forests are dense and atmospheric. The castles are massive and imposing. And the attention to detail is ridiculous. Like you can see how much love and care went into recreating this historical setting. The music is great too, really adds to that medieval atmosphere. But here's what really sells this game for me, and why it fits perfectly into this list of games that are worth every penny. It's the depth and the respect for your time. Like, yes, this game is long. Yes, it's going to take you 100 plus hours to see everything. But every single one of those hours is filled with meaningful content. You're not grinding the same enemies over and over. You're not collecting 500 feathers scattered across the map for no reason. You're engaging with systems that have real depth, making choices that have real consequences, exploring a world that feels real and reactive. And for people who really want to dive deep, there's so much to learn and master. Like, you could spend dozens of hours just getting good at combat, or becoming an expert in speechcraft and talking your way through situations, or mastering the lockpicking and sneaking systems to play as a thief. The game lets you approach situations in multiple ways, and that flexibility means you can really roleplay your character however you want. If you want a meaty, dense, historically authentic medieval RPG that's going to consume 100 plus hours of your life with meaningful, engaging content, this is absolutely it. It's not going to be for everyone because of the slower pacing, the learning curve, the jank, but if you're the type of player who appreciates depth, who wants to really sink their teeth into systems and master them, then this game is worth every single penny. Fallout 4 is a really interesting one for this list because I know this game gets a lot of criticism, especially from longtime Fallout fans. People will argue about the dialogue system, the role-playing stuff, the story choices, all that. And yeah, some of those criticisms are fair. But when we're talking about a single-player game that gives you an absurd amount of meaningful stuff to do, Fallout 4 is honestly kind of ridiculous. Because the moment you step out of Vault 111 and see the Commonwealth for the first time, the game just becomes this giant playground of exploration. And this is something Bethesda has always been really good at. You pick a direction, you start walking, and within 5 minutes, you're already getting distracted by something. Maybe it's a random building on the horizon, maybe it's a radio signal you picked up, maybe it's a weird little side quest that just popped up. The game constantly pulls you off the path. And what I like about Fallout 4 specifically is that the world just feels dense with little stories. Almost every building you walk into has some kind of environmental storytelling going on. You'll find skeletons placed in weird positions, terminals with logs explaining what happened during the war, little visual setups that tell you a story without the game even saying anything. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's creepy, sometimes it's surprisingly sad. And if you're the type of player who likes poking around every corner of the map, you can easily spend dozens of hours just exploring. Then there's the quest content, which is honestly huge. On top of the main story, you've got faction quest lines with the Brotherhood of Steel, the Institute, the Railroad, the Minutemen. Each of those chains has multiple missions and different endings depending on who you side with. So even one playthrough already takes a long time, but if you actually want to see the different faction outcomes, suddenly the replay value gets pretty big. But I think the biggest thing that really blew up the playtime for a lot of people is the settlement system. This is the feature where you can basically rebuild parts of the wasteland by claiming locations and turning them into settlements. At first, it seems like a small side mechanic, but if it clicks with you, it becomes this massive time sink. You're gathering resources, building defenses, placing houses, setting up farms, wiring electricity, customizing your little post-apocalyptic towns. Some people basically turned Fallout 4 into a full-on settlement building simulator. And then, of course, there's just the character progression and build variety. The perk system lets you go in a lot of different directions depending on how you want to play. You can build a stealth sniper character, a power armor tank with heavy weapons, a melee psycho running around with a baseball bat, or someone who focuses more on crafting and settlements. Because the game supports so many playstyles, it naturally encourages replaying it with different builds. The combat also feels way better than older Bethesda games. The shooting actually feels pretty solid this time around, especially with the weapon customization system, where you can modify guns in a bunch of different ways. You're constantly finding new weapons, upgrading them, experimenting with attachments, turning a basic rifle into some ridiculous custom monster. And then, on top of all that, the game just has an endless amount of little distractions. Random encounters, side quests, companions with their own stories, crafting systems, scavenging for materials, exploring vaults, hunting legendary enemies for rare gear. You start playing thinking you'll do a couple of missions, and suddenly you realize you've been wandering around the wasteland for like 4 hours doing completely random stuff. Hitman World of Assassination is like the perfect example of a game that completely proves my point about how playtime isn't just about one single playthrough. Like, if you just blasted through the main story missions of all 3 games in this package, you're probably looking at maybe 20-25 hours, and you'd think, okay, that's decent, but that is missing the entire point of what makes Hitman so incredible and so worth your money. Because this is a game that is designed from the ground up for you to replay each mission like 20, 30, maybe even 50 times. And every single time, you're going to find new ways to approach it, new methods to execute your targets. So let me explain what Hitman World of Assassination actually is. It's basically the Hitman trilogy from IO Interactive all packaged together. You're getting Hitman 1, Hitman 2, and Hitman 3. But they're all integrated into one game with all the improvements and features from the latest version. So you're playing through like 20 plus main missions across all these exotic locations around the world, plus tons of additional content, escalations, elusive targets, featured contracts, user-created missions. Like, the amount of stuff here is staggering. And the core gameplay loop is you're Agent 47, this legendary assassin, and you're dropped into these massive sandbox levels with one or more targets to eliminate. And the game gives you so much freedom in how you approach it. Like, you can go in guns blazing and just shoot everyone, but that's not really the point. The point is to be creative, to be stealthy, to make it look like an accident, to blend in with disguises, to manipulate the environment and NPCs to set up these elaborate kills that feel like you're directing a movie. Each mission takes place in this huge, detailed location. You've got a fashion show in Paris, a mansion in Sapienza, Italy, a hotel in Bangkok, a movie set in Morocco, a rich guy's compound in Colorado, a hospital in Hokkaido, a racetrack in Miami, a rainforest village in Colombia, a bank in New York, an English manor, Berlin nightclub, Chongqing neon-lit streets, a vineyard in Argentina, and more. And each of these locations is like its own little world with hundreds of NPCs going about their routines, tons of rooms and areas to explore, multiple entry points, tons of items and weapons scattered around. Your first playthrough of a level, you're probably just fumbling around, trying to figure out where your target is. Maybe following the mission stories, which are these guided opportunities that show you cool ways to kill your target. Like in the Paris level, you can disguise yourself as a runway model and push a lighting rig onto your target during the fashion show. Or you can poison their drink. Or you can shoot a chandelier and make it fall on them. Or you can rig a fireworks display to explode. And that's just scratching the surface of what's possible in that one level. But then you complete the mission and you unlock more starting locations, more disguises, more items you can bring into the level. And the game has this mastery system where as you complete challenges in each level, you unlock new stuff and gain mastery levels. And there are like hundreds of challenges per level. Kill the target with a fish. Kill the target while disguised as a flamingo mascot. Don't get spotted the entire mission. Complete the mission in under 2 minutes. Kill both targets with one explosion. And doing these challenges forces you to approach the level in completely different ways. And that's when the game opens up and you start to really understand the depth. Like you'll play the same level 10 times, and each time you're doing something completely different. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is straight up a mandatory mention. I jumped into this game looking for a solid stealth experience, and man, the sheer volume of stuff you get to do here is ridiculous. My best pitch really is, if you like games where you can look at a massive enemy outpost and tackle it in literally 100 different ways, this game is definitely for you. You play as Venom Snake, and they just drop you into these huge, sprawling open-world maps in Afghanistan and Africa. And dude, the graphics! I know I mentioned before that some games go for an artsy look, but MGSV is going for that cinematic, photorealistic style, and the Fox engine still looks ultra-realistic even today. The visual style, the daylight cycle, getting some really crazy sunsets while a random sandstorm completely blinds you and the enemy guards. It all just absolutely works. It creates this incredibly immersive world where you really feel like you're out there in the dirt. But the real value, the reason this doesn't feel like developers padding the game with garbage, is the Sandbox gameplay loop. It is insanely deep. You are in charge of everything. You dictate where you infiltrate, what time of day you strike, and exactly what gear you bring. You can take it slow and really, make every single move deliberate. You can tranquilize a whole squad, attach them to Fulton balloons, and literally steal their guys, their vehicles, and their shipping containers to build up your own private army back at Mother Base. You have to actually think like a tactical operator. There is so much strategy because the AI adapts to you. If you get too headshot happy, the enemies start wearing helmets. If you attack at night too much, they bust out night vision goggles and flashlights. So it's always kind of like a balancing act of how you approach a mission. You can choose your moves very carefully, but there are times where you've got to hurry up. You got to think quick when a guard spots you, and suddenly the entire base is raining mortars on your head. You can call in an airstrike, or have your buddy, like this awesome sniper named Quiet, or literally a wolf with a knife in its mouth named D-Dog, bail you out. Red Dead Redemption 2 is honestly one of the easiest games to put on a list like this, because this thing is just an absurd amount of game. Like, when people talk about getting their money's worth out of a single-player experience, Rockstar basically went completely overboard here. The main story alone is already massive, but the real magic of this game is just how much stuff exists in the world outside of that main path. First off, the main story itself is huge and incredibly detailed. You're following Arthur Morgan and the Vanderlyn gang as everything slowly falls apart, and it's one of those narratives where the longer you play, the more attached you get to the characters. There are so many little camp interactions, conversations, and character moments that make the whole gang feel like actual people. You'll walk through camp and just hear random dialogue between members, or sit down and play a game of poker with them, or go on these small side activities that slowly build relationships over time. And that alone can easily take like 50 to 60 hours if you're taking your time. But the thing with Red Dead Redemption 2 is that the story is almost just one part of the whole experience. The real bulk of the game is just living in the world. The map is gigantic and insanely detailed, and Rockstar filled it with so many little systems and activities that you can easily get distracted for hours without touching a mission. You've got hunting, fishing, bounty hunting, treasure hunting, gambling, random stranger missions, gang hideouts, legendary animals, crafting outfits, upgrading your camp, collecting all kinds of weird items. The list just keeps going. And none of it feels like generic filler either, because the world itself is so immersive. Even something simple like hunting an animal turns into this whole process where you track it, study it, try to get the perfect shot, skin it, bring the materials back for crafting. And then there are the random encounters, which are honestly some of the coolest parts of the game. You'll just be riding through the wilderness and suddenly you run into someone who needs help, or a guy trying to rob you, or some weird little situation happening on the side of the road. Sometimes they turn into full mini storylines that you keep running into across different parts of the map. The world just constantly feels alive. Towns have schedules, NPCs react to what you do, wildlife behaves in believable ways. There are moments where you're not even doing anything important gameplay-wise. You're just riding through the mountains at sunset, or walking through a swamp at night, and the atmosphere alone is enough to keep you engaged. The whole appeal of Mass Effect is that it's this long, continuous journey where your choices carry over across all three games. You start in the first game as Commander Shepard, building your crew, making decisions about the fate of different species, deciding who lives, who dies, and those choices actually follow you into the next games. So by the time you reach the end of the trilogy, it really feels like you went through this massive sci-fi saga that you shaped yourself. The first game is where everything begins, and even though it's the oldest one, the remaster cleaned it up a lot. The shooting feels better, the visuals are sharper, and exploring planets and doing side missions feels a lot smoother now. But what still really carries that game is the world building. You're meeting all these alien species, learning about the politics of the galaxy, uncovering the mystery of the Reapers. It does a great job setting up this huge sci-fi universe. Then you move into Mass Effect 2, which a lot of people consider the best one, and that's where the game really starts expanding the character side of things. Instead of just focusing on the main threat, the story spends a lot of time building relationships with your crew. Every squad member has their own loyalty mission, their own backstory, their own problems you help them deal with. And those missions are some of the best content in the entire trilogy. By the time you reach Mass Effect 3, the stakes are massive because everything you've been building across the trilogy finally starts coming together. The galaxy is at war with the Reapers, and the game constantly references decisions you made earlier. Characters you helped show up again, old choices come back in unexpected ways, and the story really feels like the culmination of everything you did before. And the cool thing is that this isn't just about the main story. Each game has tons of side missions, optional character moments, hidden conversations, and smaller stories happening around the galaxy. Some of the best writing in the series actually comes from those little moments where you're just talking to your crew between missions and learning more about them. Then there's the build variety and gameplay styles. You can play Shepard in a bunch of different ways depending on the class you choose. You can be a soldier focused on heavy weapons, a biotic character throwing enemies around with space magic, or a tech specialist hacking enemies and controlling the battlefield. Each class changes how combat feels, and that alone makes replaying the trilogy pretty appealing. But honestly, the biggest reason the Legendary Edition feels like such a good deal is just the sheer amount of content. You're getting 3 full-length RPGs that can easily take 30 to 40 hours each if you're doing a good amount of side content. Cyberpunk 2077 is a really interesting one because obviously the game had a pretty rough launch. Everybody knows that story by now. But if you look at the game today, especially after all the updates and fixes, it's honestly become one of those single-player RPGs where you can just sink an insane amount of time into it and still feel like you're constantly discovering new stuff. Because the first thing that you will see when you start the game is Night City itself. This is easily one of the most detailed cities ever built in a game. It's huge, it's dense, it's layered with verticality, neon lights everywhere, different districts with their own vibe, and the game does a really good job of making the city feel alive. You're driving through these massive highways, walking through crowded markets, sneaking through corporate skyscrapers, wandering through these dirty back alleys full of gangs. It just feels like a real place. And the main story alone is already pretty substantial. You're playing as V, dealing with this biochip stuck in your head that's slowly killing you while the consciousness of Johnny Silverhand is basically taking over your mind. The whole narrative has this very personal, almost tragic tone to it. It's not just about saving the world or anything like that, it's more about survival and identity. And depending on the choices you make throughout the game, you can end up with several different endings. But where Cyberpunk really stretches out its playtime is all the side content. The game is full of side quests that are honestly just as well written as the main story. Some of the best character moments actually come from these optional quest lines, like the entire Panem storyline, the stuff with Judy, River, Carrie. All those characters have these multi-mission arcs that feel almost like their own mini-stories inside the game. And what I like is that these quests usually aren't just quick errands. A lot of them have actual narrative weight. You're making decisions, dealing with consequences, learning more about the world and the people living in it. Some of those side stories are honestly some of the most memorable parts of the game. Then there's the build variety, which is where replayability really starts to come in. Cyberpunk lets you approach the game in a lot of different ways, depending on how you spec your character. You can play as a stealth hacker who barely even fires a gun, just taking over cameras and frying enemies' brains remotely. Or you can go full cybernetic tank with shotguns and heavy armor. Or build a character focused on blades and quick movement, where you're basically slicing through enemies at insane speeds. Because of that, the combat encounters can play out very differently depending on how you approach them. One player might sneak through an entire building without being seen, another might hack everything in the room from outside, and someone else might just kick the door down and start blasting. Now, God of War Ragnarok is another one of those games where you finish the main story and you already feel like you got your money's worth. But then you realize the game still has a ton of stuff left for you to do. Because yeah, the main campaign alone is already pretty big. If you're just focusing on the story, it's like 25-30 hours, which for a very cinematic single-player game is already pretty substantial. But Ragnarok is built in a way where the side content actually feels like a real extension of the game, instead of just random filler. First off, the main story itself is just massive in scope. It's the continuation of Kratos and Atreus' journey, and the game really leans into the idea that everything is building toward Ragnarok. You're traveling across all the different realms, meeting new characters, dealing with gods like Thor and Odin, and the whole thing just feels incredibly high budget from start to finish. The production value here is kind of ridiculous. The voice acting, the cutscenes, the scale of the boss fights, it all just feels huge. But what I really liked about Ragnarok is how the side content actually matters. The game has these things called favors, which are basically side quests, but a lot of them are actually tied to the characters and the world in meaningful ways. You'll go off on a side mission with Mimir or Freya, and suddenly you're learning more about their past or uncovering some piece of Norse lore that ties back into the bigger story. So even when you're technically doing optional stuff, it still feels like it belongs in the world. Then you've got the realm exploration, which is a lot bigger than the previous God of War. Each realm has its own regions, puzzles, hidden areas, bosses, collectibles, all that stuff. And some of them are surprisingly big. Like Vanaheim in particular is almost like its own mini open world, with multiple paths, side quests, hidden dragons to fight, all kinds of secrets tucked away in the jungle areas. And then there are the combat challenges and optional bosses, which is where a lot of players end up spending extra hours. The Berserker fights are a big one. They're basically these super tough optional bosses scattered across the realms, and some of them are brutally difficult. If you're the type of player who likes mastering the combat system and upgrading your build, those fights can take a lot of practice to beat. Speaking of that, the combat system itself just keeps expanding as you play. Kratos gets new weapons, new abilities, different runic attacks, relics, armor builds, all that stuff. By the time you're deep into the game, fights start feeling way more complex than they did in the early hours. You're juggling cooldowns, switching weapons mid-fight, managing crowd control, pulling off these big combos. It's one of those systems that gets more satisfying the longer you engage with it. And the thing is, Ragnarok just keeps layering content on top of everything. You've got hidden collectibles, NieR chests with puzzles, gear upgrades, armor sets to chase, secret areas in different realms, lore entries scattered around the world. If you're the type of player who likes clearing out the map and seeing everything the game has to offer, the playtime can easily jump to 50 or even 60 hours. But what really makes the game feel worth it is that it doesn't feel bloated. The side content actually has purpose, the exploration is rewarding, and the world itself is interesting to be in. Every realm has its own visual style, enemies, and little bits of mythology that make it feel distinct. Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord is so good and so janky at the same time, and I love it for both of those reasons. Like, this is one of those games where you can describe it to someone and they'll be like, wait, that sounds amazing, why haven't I heard more about this? And then you show them a video and they're like, oh, okay, I see why. Because yeah, the graphics aren't cutting edge, the animations can be stiff, there are bugs, the UI is kind of clunky. But underneath all of that jank is one of the most engaging, addictive, deep medieval sandbox games ever made. And once you get past the rough edges and you start understanding the systems, you can easily lose 200, 300, maybe even 500 plus hours to this game. And none of it feels wasted because every campaign is different. Every playthrough tells a different story. So let me break down what Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord actually is. It's a medieval mega sandbox warfare and strategy game set in the fictional land of Calradia. And you start as literally nobody, like you're just some random person with a small amount of money and maybe a couple of followers. And from there, you can do whatever you want. You can become a merchant, trading goods between cities. You can become a bandit, raiding villages and caravans. You can become a mercenary, fighting for different kingdoms. You can join a kingdom as a vassal and work your way up to becoming a lord with your own fiefs. You can even start your own kingdom and try to conquer the entire map. The game just drops you into this living, breathing world and says, go do something. And that freedom is incredible. And the world is actually living and breathing. Like, AI lords are constantly moving around the map, besieging castles, raiding villages, getting into battles with each other. Kingdoms are at war, making peace, forming alliances. The economy is simulated, so prices fluctuate based on supply and demand. Caravans are moving goods between cities, bandits are spawning and getting hunted down, and you're just one small part of this massive system, and that creates these emergent stories that are unique to your playthrough. Let me talk about the core gameplay loop, because it's so satisfying. You're traveling around this overworld map, right? And you're recruiting troops from villages, training them, managing your party's food and morale. And then you get into battles, and this is where the game really shines. The battles in Bannerlord are massive. Like, you can command armies of hundreds of troops, and it's not some abstract thing where you're just watching numbers go down. You're actually on the battlefield in third person, fighting alongside your troops, giving them orders, charging into enemy formations, commanding cavalry flanks, positioning archers on hills. And the combat feels really good once you get the hang of it. It's this directional melee system where you have to aim your swings in blocks. Like, if an enemy is swinging from the left, you need to block left. If you want to swing at their head, you aim up and swing. And then there's mounted combat, which is so satisfying, like riding a horse at full speed and couching a lance through an enemy soldier, or doing drive-by horse archery. It just feels amazing. The Long Dark. I like games that don't hold your hand, and I like games that focus solely on pure survival, like from simple stuff to full-blown hardcore simulators. And I jumped into this game, The Long Dark, just looking for something cool. And man, this is just a good-ass game. My best pitch really is if you played survival games and you really enjoyed some of those more arduous treks, like when you have to push through a blinding blizzard and your equipment is degrading and you feel absolutely desperate, this game is definitely for you. It's a pretty simple setup. You're just a person stranded in the freezing Canadian wilderness after a mysterious geomagnetic disaster. And the game is straight up just like a raw survival adventure. There is a story mode, which is great, but most of the insane value really is the raw gameplay of the sandbox mode. You have to actually think like a survivor. You're managing cold, and you're also managing your hunger and your thirst. So the stuff you find isn't just for debuffs, it's for actually keeping yourself alive. There's a whole cooking element on top of everything, where you need to conjure up food, hot beverages, and boil water to keep yourself going. I tried to really be conservative and save my things for some of the best situations like a survival horror game, but you realize very quickly you need to use your tools properly and constantly just to see the next sunrise. It can feel incredibly frustrating and sometimes tedious, because there are points in this game where I've frozen to death or gotten mauled by a bear and lost my entire permadeath run, and that can be pretty brutal, but it kind of comes with that whole persevering thing. There is something about that continued, ridiculous, almost thick-headed, stupid perseverance and really getting there, surviving one more night. Obviously, they're not going for photorealistic graphics. They're going for something a little artsy here, and I think it absolutely works. The visual style, the daylight cycle, getting some really crazy sunsets, some incredible vistas, it just does a really good job setting you up to take something away from it. I actually liked more of the solitude, the solitary nature of the game. I like when it was just me alone, because the game's quietest moments are its best. It's the tension, it's that you're getting hooked, just one more house to loot, just one more fire to start. But then it's the snow falling, it's a completely blinding snowstorm while you're hiding in a cabin, and the game has some really nice minimalistic music that is perfect at specific moments. Dishonored 2, on paper, it doesn't look like a massive game. If you just rush through the story, you could probably finish it in around 12 to 15 hours or something like that. But the thing with this game is that it is absolutely not designed to be played that way. Dishonored 2 is one of those games where the real value comes from how insanely replayable it is, and how much depth is packed into every single level. Because the levels in this game are honestly some of the best designed spaces in modern gaming. Arcane really went all out here. Every mission is basically this big sandbox where there are multiple paths, secret routes, hidden rooms, different ways to approach targets, and a bunch of little systems interacting with each other. You're not just walking down a hallway toward the objective. You're constantly looking around thinking, okay, can I climb up there? Can I sneak through that window? Can I possess that guard and walk in? And that's where the powers and playstyles come in. Right at the start, you choose whether you want to play as Corvo again or as Emily, and they both have completely different power sets. Corvo has the classic abilities like Blink and Possession that fans already know, but Emily has her own stuff like Far Reach and Domino that completely changes how you approach encounters. Domino especially is one of those powers that just leads to some ridiculous situations where you link multiple enemies together and take them all out at once. And the crazy part is that you can play the entire game in completely different ways. You can go full stealth, never get detected, take everyone out quietly. You can go full chaos and just fight your way through levels like a supernatural assassin. Or you can do something in between, where you experiment with gadgets, traps, and powers. The game supports all of it. Then you have the mission design, which is honestly where Dishonored 2 really shows off. There are some levels here that people still talk about years later because they're just so creative. The Clockwork Mansion is a big one, where the entire house is basically this giant mechanical puzzle shifting around while you move through it. And then there's A Crack in the Slab, which is that mission where you're literally switching between two timelines inside the same level. Stuff like that just sticks in your brain. And because these missions are so layered, you naturally want to replay them. The first time you go through a level, you're kind of figuring things out, maybe sneaking through the obvious routes. But then you realize there were 5 other ways you could have approached the same target, secret paths you missed, alternative non-lethal solutions, hidden story bits, all kinds of stuff. The game also tracks a ton of different challenges and achievements tied to different playstyles. So suddenly you're thinking about doing a ghost run where you're never detected, or a no powers run where you play the entire game without supernatural abilities. Or maybe you want to replay it with the other character to see how their powers change everything. And that's where Dishonored 2 really shines in terms of value. It's one of those games where a single playthrough might be around 15 hours, But if you actually engage with the systems and experiment with different approaches, suddenly you're doing multiple runs, and each run can feel surprisingly fresh because the tools you use completely change how you interact with the world.